It's a nightmare for this family. They were not only being abused, but they were being intimidated into silence.
The girls loved each other. It was a tight family and just destroyed them on so many levels.
She cut the guy off, but by then it was too late. The damage had already been done.
Why in God's name would they release this dangerous woman into the community?
She knew what she was doing. She placed that knife under the couch, intending to use it.
That's when he sees the body on the floor, covered in blood, and that's when my whole world just falls upside down.
You think I could fit through there?
In the afternoon, when police were notified, and police arrived on the scene.
Hello? Police?
Wow, oh my God.
Can you hear me? Hello? What happened? What happened? Oh, can't believe what happened.
Back up.
Oh my God.
Back up.
All right, just stay back, please. Stay back.
Have a body inside with blood around it. I need you to dispatch EMS to my location. Do I have permission to kick the door in?
Stop! Come here! Come here, now!
50 responding and on the scene, 1500 over.
Oh my God. The crime scene was secured, and then an investigation occurred. And what you want to know is what transpired, what led up to this. Because certainly, when there's a violent homicide that takes place, that storyline had its ending. What we didn't know was the chapters before that.
All right. You doing okay? You hanging in there?
Yeah.
We're going to start.
Do you want me to start now?
Whenever you're ready.
My name is Cherie Gilbert. This is the first time I'm speaking out about my family's story. Here's one of my mom, Sarah. She was about 5 or 6. This is Shannon and I when we were teenagers. Here's a group picture of all of us, one of my favorites. It just brings up a lot of memories for me. When I look at this, I see a childhood. I see a lot of sadness and heartbreak. I was about 10 years old when we moved to Ellenville.
Ellenville's a small town, really a depressed town that's sort of halfway between Manhattan and Albany in upstate New York. When Mary Gilbert first moved to Ellenville, she was a single mother with 4 daughters by more than one man. Shannon was the oldest, and then Cherie was number 2, and then Sarah and Stevie, of course, little Stevie. Mary moved to Ellenville after having a very difficult relationship with the father of her children. And eventually she went off on her own.
It was one of the best summers of my life. We played outside from sunup to sundown. We just had a really good time, and we just had a summer full of memories, and we tried to make the most of it. I was hopeful for the future.
It was a fresh start for Mary, but it was not a town with a lot of promise. But Mary Gilbert was an independent spirit. She was very determined to do things on her own. She was determined to work and not accept a handout from anyone.
When I met Mary,
She didn't want to go into detail about her past. She just said that some bad things had happened and she was trying to do what was right now. And she was trying to move forward and trying to make things better for herself and for her children. They were the light of her life. They meant everything to her.
We all just kind of had our own unique personalities, but you could tell by looking at us or just by even hanging out with us that we were sisters. I was the cool one, the pretty one, the sassy one, and Sarah was the goofy one, the silly one. Shannon was the oldest sister. She was the leader. We all tried to be just like her. She was just very beautiful. She was talented. And she just had this personality that literally, if she walked in the room, you would know she was there. That's just the attention that she would draw.
When Shannon was coming to her own, from 10 years old on, she started displaying erratic behavior that Mary really couldn't control. At one point, doctors thought she might have been bipolar and prescribed her meds, but those medicines weren't helpful to her.
You could tell that there was something going on with her versus with Sarah and I. Shannon did have mental health, behavioral issues. Maybe those issues were creeping up on her, and the adult in her life didn't know how to handle it.
It was a difficult time for both mother and daughter, and in Mary's telling of it, she couldn't parent Shannon. She couldn't give Shannon what she needed. And so she went into foster care. To hear Shannon tell it, it was like she was expelled from her family. She never felt the same after that. To her, this was the great exile that she was experiencing from Mary's life and from the life of her sisters. The friends from that time remember her as carrying a secret sadness within her, which really was quite simple. She felt like she was an outsider in her own family. It took a few years, but finally, when Shannon was 13, she was able to come home again. She wanted nothing more than to come back and live with Mary and with her sisters. But what she didn't know is that there was a new man in Mary's life. His name was Richard Werner.
When I first met Rick, he seemed like he was generally interested in Mary and took an interest in her children, and she felt that this was going to be a long-term relationship.
The beginning, he seemed like a really nice guy, and it was, he was the evil man. He was very evil. Rick is the one who convinced my mom that Shannon was a troublemaker. He saw her as defiant, you know, as someone who didn't want to listen to the rules. And I don't think he really wanted to get her help. He forced my mom to put Shannon back into foster care. I just think he wanted to get rid of her.
What Shannon never knew, and what Mary didn't know at the time, was that Sarah and Cherie were both being horribly sexually abused by Richard Werner, by Mary's boyfriend. This was a violent relationship where they were not only being abused, but they were being intimidated into silence.
He was very abusive towards us. So once certain situations came to light and we let my mom know about him and his ways, she took this information and went to authorities.
Right when she found out, she did the right thing. I was really proud of her because she worked so hard. She worked so hard. And her main goal was just to make life good for her and her girls.
When Mary found out about the sexual abuse, she had an appropriate reaction. She cut the guy off, and he ended up getting arrested and serving time in prison for his crimes. But by then, it was too late. The damage had already been done.
When Sarah was around 10, Sarah, who had always been the reliable one, was suddenly in a lot of trouble. Her grades were slipping. Meanwhile, Shannon was the lucky one to have escaped because she's in a more stable house. She was bright. She was getting straight A's. She ended up finishing high school a year early with straight A's. She was outgoing. She was a performer. She was a singer. It seemed like she was bound for greatness at every turn. At the same time, she also was alienated from her own family and carried a great sorrow within her. The anger or the sadness she was feeling about being removed from her family was turning into determination. She was going to go and audition in New York, and she was going to try and be in Broadway shows. She was going to be a success no matter what. And meanwhile, Sarah felt trapped at home and not sure of what the future held for her. And then when she was 14 years old, she found out that she was pregnant. Sarah at 14 being pregnant would seem like a crisis to a lot of girls that age, but Sarah was actually kind of pleased about it. She felt like she would be a good mother. She could leave that house and have a family of her own, a family that she could do right finally, after all the things that had been done wrong when she was a child. Sarah told her mother that she was pregnant. But Mary wasn't going to let that happen to one of her daughters. And that didn't go over well with Sarah. Well, I first looked into this case as a crime reporter, but really the book I wrote is about families. And I think the relationship between the Gilbert sisters and between Mary and her daughters is really what ended up being one of the most compelling parts of this case. Well, by the time Sarah was 14 and Shannon was 16, they really were on very different tracks. It was kind of ironic, actually. Shannon, who had been expelled from her family, was, it seemed, on her way to becoming a great big success. And meanwhile, Sarah, who had been the studious one, the well-behaved one, she had been determined to start a family of her own, but Mary wasn't going to let her follow through on her plan.
Sarah wanted a child, and she conceived a child at 14, and Mary insisted that she have an abortion. You see this soft, sweet, gentle girl who is told to abort a child, and in her mind, that was very, very bad. And everything really began to come apart at the age of 14.
Sarah left home. She didn't want to be under Mary's control any longer. She went to live with her boyfriend, Manny. They were going to start a life together.
Shannon and I had talked about it a couple times, and we were kind of upset because we're just like, she was settling for a boyfriend that wasn't really nice to her, and she was settling for a fast food restaurant job when I know she was smarter than that. It just angered me that she had the potential to do a lot more with her life, and she didn't take that potential.
On the other hand, Shannon was determined to be a success, and job one for Shannon was really to prove to her family that she was a success, that she was worthy of love. Shannon was like a lot of people who came to New York with stars in their eyes and with dreams of making it big. She had talent. She had real talent. And she worked hard to get what she wanted. But of course, for many people, including her, that dream just didn't come true.
Shannon worked in a few menial jobs, but at the same time, Shannon suddenly became glamorous. She had dyed her hair. She had fancy jewelry and clothing, and she seemed to be very successful. She would come home about twice a month, and she would bring gifts and money, and Mary would ask her for money, and she would give it.
Shannon loved her family, and at the time, she knew that her mom was struggling financially, and by doing this, she was helping out. When I heard that Shannon was a call girl working for an escort service, I was shocked. I never thought she would take that route.
I was aware of what Shannon was doing, and I didn't approve of it. And I didn't want her to do it. But my mom was very supportive of Shannon's lifestyle. It was hard, but my mom was always really proud.
Mary respected that Shannon was doing what she needed to do to get by. She may not have respected the way that Shannon was doing it, But she could tell herself that that was Shannon's choice and appreciate that Shannon's heart was in the right place. While Shannon was in New York, Sarra felt like she was struggling. Sarra probably was very resentful toward her sister, who's got a life independent of her mother.
Six years after the first abortion, when she was 14, Sarra was thrilled to be pregnant again. There's a real sense of motherhood that she harbored, and that motherhood concept derived from her upbringing and the abuse that she suffered. She wanted to purify that situation. She wanted to have a child that wouldn't suffer like she did.
Shannon was visiting us, and Sarra said that her water had just broken. It was early in the morning, and we all hurried up to get to the hospital, and I stood in the room, as well as my mom and Sarah's boyfriend, while she gave birth. Everyone was happy, but there was some underlying tension between Sarra and Shannon. And so I think as part of maybe Shannon's punishment, Sarra didn't want her in the room, and she chose me instead. I think if things were different, she might have chosen Shannon, but I was just happy to be there and watch my nephew be born. It was just a really special moment for all of us, and it was just welcoming another life into our family, and we were really happy about it.
Mary was ecstatic about having grandchildren. Mary was very close to Sarah's son. She loved him. She really had a special bond with him.
This is the last photo that my sisters and I took together. It was Easter 2010. I actually remember this day like yesterday. The poses and everything, it's kind of how we posed our entire lives when we took pictures. It just makes me sad. It makes me sad because it's no longer us. It was once us, but it's no longer us. And my sister is no longer here.
The last time that Shannon spoke with her mother, Mary, was on April 30th, 2010. They were making plans.
Sarah's son was turning a year old, and we had been planning a Mother's Day get-together and his birthday. And that's when Shannon said she was going to come up for that. And she never did.
The last text volley between mother and daughter is actually pretty poignant because Mary knew that one thing that Shannon was going to do before coming back to Ellenville to celebrate that birthday was she was going to go out and work as an escort. So she said to her, "Be safe." And the answer from Shannon was, "I always am." That was sort of a daughter's way of telling a mother, "I can take care of myself." Shannon doesn't come home on Saturday, May 1st. And Mary first hears that there's trouble just a couple days later when she gets a phone call from someone who says that he is a resident of Oak Beach. Oak Beach is a small town, gated community on the South Shore of Long Island. He says that Shannon was knocking on doors and asking for help. And he wanted to try to help Shannon, but that she left. And he wanted to know if she ever got home.
I knew in my heart that something had happened, but I didn't really want to believe it. So we had to travel down to where she was last seen, which was Oak Beach, and ask around to see if anyone had seen her. And we passed around flyers, of her to the neighbors to see if they could identify her and give us more information.
What stands out to you looking back now of trying to convince people to find Shannon?
What stands out to me is that that place is full of secrets.
The Gilbert sisters and mother were able to learn that Shannon had gone as an escort to Oak Beach. She was there for several hours and then called 911 to report that they're trying to kill me.
Shannon went to a client's house and something freaked her out while she was there. So she ran from the client's house, and that's when she disappeared.
The period after her daughter disappeared, when the police were ignoring the case, when they were barely investigating, that was a hard time for Mary. She was angry and couldn't understand why the police didn't seem to care. And then suddenly the whole world cared when Shannon became linked to this serial killer case.
There was a body found over on the Ocean Parkway. And then it turns out one of the canine with a cadaver dog went up there and finds 2 more bodies. The only real common thing here was basically that there were sex workers. And that's when the story really broke, that we realized something was going on. There were multiple bodies dumped along the Ocean Parkway. In the beginning, it was very confusing. We've got the women being found dead along the Ocean Parkway, and then you had Shannon Gilbert, and the police tried to keep it separate. I don't know why it wasn't connected. If you find 9 sex workers and then you're still missing another sex worker, I mean, it's probably connected. The police definitely weren't taking it as seriously as they should have. They kind of dropped the ball on it, and as it went along, I felt they did even less.
They need to step up and do the right thing, or go home and retire.
Mary was deeply offended. She was rocked, and her family was rocked, and Sarra especially. Sarra really began to despair because she had a sense that Shannon had been murdered.
And we kept on saying, there's areas here you're not searching. You got to look behind the swamp over there. One of the places she was last seen in that direction.
I was in school, and it was midterm week, and I had gotten a call saying that they believe they found Shannon's remains. I just remember feeling really, really, really sad, but now she could be at peace.
When I got the call from Mary, that's it, and she told me they found the body. They found Shannon, and she's like, I don't know how to feel right now. I can't even imagine, especially after trying to keep them safe for so many years, to lose a child that way.
The police commissioner of Suffolk County announced publicly that Shannon had likely drowned. That is inherent absurdity. There isn't a scintilla of a doubt that Shannon Gilbert did not die by drowning. It's ground cover. There's no water. That's impossible. So how else did she get there? She didn't walk there by herself. That's next to impossible as well. So the only other way she could be there is somebody put her there. And she was murdered.
We did Shannon's memorial. It was March 15th, 2015. It was a sad day. I just remember when we got there, I saw them drive through with the casket, and I just was hysterical. And it was kind of like our way to say goodbye to her one last time.
This was a devastating and emotional moment for Mary and for all of Shannon's sisters. Sarra really had a complete collapse. Everything that seemed fragile about her in the months and years prior to this really came to a head.
She was using Molly, smoking marijuana daily. She was trying to essentially self-medicate and keeping her calm in light of what happened to Shannon. Then in February of 2016, Mary called me and said, look, we've had problems. Sarah's just gotten arrested and she's lost her mind.
In January of 2014, Sarra was just saying these really strange things that weren't making any sense. And she had become very delusional. She just really didn't seem very coherent. And as the day progressed, she started to get pretty violent. And I remember she tried to grab me, grab my mom, and spit on her. And my mom said, you know, we're gonna take you to the hospital, Sarah. I think there's definitely something going on. She didn't know if it were something to do with drugs or if she was having a mental breakdown. So my mom called the ambulance to come get her so that way she could be admitted. Sarra was diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoia.
Sarra Gilbert began to suffer extreme symptoms of psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, disorganization in her thinking and behavior, and it all got focused on the fact that she believed it was her mother's doing, that her mother was sending demons.
When Sarra was in the hospital, I remember her telling me she was really mad at my mom for even having her admitted in the first place, and she felt like it was a betrayal. I don't think my sister really ever got over that.
In many ways, the death of her sister was the last straw in what would become Sarra's mental illness. The thoughts about the man who had killed her sister, the devil, and issues with God and heaven and demons and bad gods, and her mother, who Sarra felt was responsible for her sexual abuse. All of that began to infuse her own psyche and color the nature of her delusions.
In the beginning of 2016, everything seems okay. Sarra is taking care of her son. They get a new puppy, a gift from Manny, the boy's father.
My nephew was really happy that he had a dog. He was getting older, and this was just a really nice, I guess, companion for him. At that time, Sarra was so against taking her medicine because of the side effects and because of her possibly thinking that we were the ones that were delusional, not her.
Sarra stopped taking her medications. She then developed this intense delusion involving Eminem, the rapper, who initially had been a positive delusion in her mind. He was an ally against the forces of evil. But that began to change in 2016, and the dog became associated with that negative delusion about Eminem. And somehow killing the dog meant getting rid of that negative energy.
It was February of 2016. There was an incident involving Sarra and her son. When the child came home, Sarra Gilbert took the child in the bathroom, 5 years old, got the puppy, filled the tub with water, and proceeded to drown the puppy in front of her child. Mary reported it to us because her grandson, the 5-year-old, told her about it.
I had begged my mom not to call the cops because I was afraid that they were going to, remove her son from the home.
Sarah?
Officers responded up there. They were immediately greeted by Sarah at the door.
Do you have any animals in the apartment?
No.
You've never owned one?
Yeah.
When did you own an animal?
A dog.
When?
Just recently. I don't have it anymore.
Where is it?
I don't know. I ran away.
The officers then, saw the garbage bag, they opened it up, and unfortunately and tragically, that's where the remains of the puppy was.
The dog looks like it's dead. So you lied to me?
Yeah, it's you.
Why did you lie to me?
Because I'm evil.
After the death of that dog, Mary and Sarah's relationship changes a little bit. Mary becomes the person who Sarah relies on the most to help her in times of crisis, to take care of her son, to come to her when there's trouble. And this is a real turnaround for them because there's always been tension. Mary's been a source of so much trouble in Sarah's life. The bad boyfriends, the abusive boyfriends, everything about what made life troublesome for Sarah as a child. But now she needs her. And Mary, to her credit, is stepping up and trying not to lose yet another daughter.
I love you, Sarah. I'll always love you. I'll always love you.
But at the same time, Mary was doing her best to get custody, even temporarily, of Sarah's son to make sure that he was out of danger, and then trying to make sure that Sarah would somehow be able to stay under protection too. And she actually visited Sarah in jail and said to her, sometimes a mother has to be tough in her love. And the two of them embraced.
Sometimes mom's gotta do mean things to show love.
That was the moment when Mary successfully was able to wrest control of Sarah's son away from Sarah. And when Sarah got out of jail and saw that she no longer was going to be her son's caregiver, that completely set her against Mary. On the morning of July 23rd, 2016, Sarah called her sister, Cherie, in the morning and said that she hadn't been sleeping the night before. She said that she'd been hearing voices again. Cherie knew exactly what that meant. She knew that Sarah was going to become dangerous and that she needed help.
And I had texted my mom shortly after that, and I said, you have to go talk to Sarah. My mom went over there with the hopes that she could talk to Sarah, but I think we all knew that there was a level of danger because Sarah was acting weird.
When Cherie can't get a hold of Mary or Sarah, she panics and she tries to get to the house as well. When she gets there, she can't get inside. Finally, she calls the police.
Did you call? Yeah, Sarah's here. I don't know.
When police arrived on the scene, they were greeted by members of Mary's family there, in particular her significant other. And as the officers were looking for a way in to try to make contact with Sarah, the significant other had looked through a window.
Wow, no God.
What happened?
Oh,
what happened?
Oh,
calm down.
And he notified the officers that there was a body on the floor.
Like, I felt like I was gonna die that day. It was just like the worst feeling, worst trauma, worst pain that I've ever in my entire life experienced, besides losing Shannon.
Do I have permission to kick the door in? Sarah. Turn around. What happened? Sarah, stop. Come here. Come here now.
Sarah Gilbert appeared as calm as I do right now, and was standing there. It was hot. She was sweating, and she had some blood spatter on her face. And she very calmly looked at the officers and said, "I just killed my mother."
You're under arrest.
That's when the officers took her into custody.
Right here, I gotta check her mother. She's cold.
I'm sorry.
I'm
so sorry.
Listen, I understand, but you have your...
I couldn't even breathe.
And when my mom died, I just wanted to crawl in a hole and die. I don't want to be talking about this. Can we stop for a second?
Of course.
Sarah was taken into custody. She was brought over to the station.
When did your mom come to your house?
Today,
Today? What time did she come to your house?
around like 9:30, 10 o'clock.
This morning?
Yeah.
Did she come to your house for any specific reason or just to
Because
say
I
hello?
wanted to talk to her.
Okay. What did you want to talk to her about?
I thought she was bad.
Okay.
When Mary Gilbert arrived at the house of Sarah Gilbert, some conversation took place on the couch.
Was anybody else in the apartment?
I hear voices, like whispers in my ears, and it would say so.
At some point, Sarah does say to her mother that you're an evil person. She refers to her as being very evil.
According to Sarah's telling of it, what sets her off the most is that there's a photograph of her little boy not far from where they're sitting, and Mary reaches over for it. That's when Sarah says that she starts stabbing.
If you had to guess how many times either you stabbed her or how many times you have...
Too many times to count. Too many times, way too many times to count.
As they put it to me, she was dead before she even knew she was dead. That was definitely a horrific crime. Probably the worst that I've seen in my career.
My mind's so scattered right now. I don't know who's doing all of this. And I just want the right person to be punished for it.
Sarah Gilbert had a mental illness, but she was capable of knowing right from wrong, appreciating the consequences of her actions. She hated her mom because her mom had taken her child, had gotten custody of her child. So she blamed her mother, and she felt that her mom deserved to die.
The woman accused of fatally stabbing her mother was in court on Friday and took the stand, recounting her misfortunes, including being sexually molested by her mother's boyfriend.
How could any reasonable person not see that this poor, broken down little girl could possibly have contemplated that what she was doing was wrong?
Before her mom came over, she took the knife from her kitchen and placed that knife under the couch, intending to use it against her mom. She always knew the consequences of what she did or what she was doing at each and every step of the way.
The anger that she felt at her mother, the resentment she felt at her mother, was not the motive ultimately to the murder. It's what fed the delusions that Sarah was suffering from. There is no doubt in my mind that at the time of the killing of her mother, she was suffering from an acute psychosis which impaired significantly her ability to understand the wrongfulness of her actions. She thought she was doing the right thing.
The jury made that determination that she was guilty. The judge sentenced Sarra to 25 years to life in state prison, and we thought it was appropriate under the circumstances.
Sarra was not guilty. Sarra was criminally insane. The person who can't see that doesn't believe that anybody could be criminally insane.
I didn't know that sick Sarra. She wasn't my sister. Sarra that killed my mom, I don't know that girl. Because if you ask anybody from our childhood, she would have never done that. And I knew that that wasn't really Sarra's behavior. It was because she was sick. There's such a stigma in this country with mental health issues, and people are either afraid or ashamed to come forward or to discuss it, to seek any kind of treatment. And it's not shameful, it's not embarrassing.
Mary stepped up as a mother to Sarra when Sarra needed her the most. In the end, she lived up to the ideals that she most held dear by trying to be a good mother. It wasn't enough to keep her alive. And that is perhaps the final tragedy here.
When I think about my mom, I just think about strength. I just think about courage. I think that she would want the world to remember her as a caring and kind person. And just a fighter. She fought with everything that she had. And she was loved. She still is. She's missed every day.